David never thought the woman he loved could become a stranger. From the outside, their lives seemed idyllic. A charming Victorian home in San Francisco, 2 beautiful children, and the kind of marriage that people envied. He and Sarah had built a life together, layered with laughter, memories, and moments of tenderness. Yet, somewhere in the crevices of that perfect facade, something sinister had taken root. It wasn't sudden, no violent arguments, no tearful confessions, just the slow unraveling of what once felt unbreakable. David could feel it in the way Sarah's laughter no longer rang through their home the same way. He noticed it in the faint flicker of her smile, how it barely reached her eyes. They still kissed each other goodbye in the mornings, but the warmth had gone. Every touch felt rehearsed, every word carefully chosen. The first time doubt crept into David's mind, he brushed it away. Sarah had been working late, claiming that the legal firm was overwhelmed with a particularly demanding case. That made sense. David had always admired her ambition, the way she pursued her career with unwavering determination. When she arrived home exhausted, collapsing onto the couch with a glass of wine, he didn't question it. But then the late nights became routine. Her excuses grew thinner. There were unexplained business trips, always with vague descriptions. David tried to believe her. He wanted to. After all, they had built 7 years of memories together. 2 daughters, Lily and Ethan, adored their mother, and he couldn't bear the thought of shattering their world. But believing was no longer easy. Sarah began dressing differently. Her usual comfortable sweaters and modest blouses were replaced with silk blouses that clung to her body. He noticed the perfume too, something dark and unfamiliar. Not the gentle floral fragrance she used to wear. This one was bolder, seductive. When he kissed her goodbye, its scent lingered on his skin long after she left. David told himself not to overthink it. A woman deserved to feel beautiful. But then the laughter began. Late at night, muffled through the walls, he heard her whispering into her phone. She claimed it was harmless, conversations with colleagues, catching up on work. But there was something in the way her voice softened, something in the laughter that wasn't meant for him. It gnawed at him, the suspicion, the dread. David tried to reason with himself. After all, wasn't he being paranoid? Sarah had been his best friend for over a decade. They'd faced struggles before. The sleepless nights when the kids were newborns, the arguments over finances, the stress of balancing demanding careers. But this felt different. This was silent, invisible, a slow poisoning of their marriage. One evening, as Sarah stood in the kitchen preparing dinner, David watched her. She hummed softly under her breath, but even that felt distant. Her phone, ever present, lay within arm's reach. When it buzzed, she glanced at it quickly, her fingers nervously brushing her hair behind her ear. David saw the tension, the anticipation. Whoever was on the other side of that screen had her full attention. "Who was that?" he asked, keeping his tone light. "Oh, just work," she replied too quickly. The lie was effortless. He wanted to press further, demand the truth, but he didn't. Not yet. Instead, David waited, watched. Every glance, every half-hearted smile, every carefully chosen excuse. They were all pieces of a puzzle he wasn't ready to complete. But the breaking point came soon enough. It was a Saturday morning. The sun bathed their kitchen in golden light as the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Lily and Ethan played in the living room, their laughter a distant hum. David sat at the table, scrolling through his phone absent-mindedly. Sarah had been up early, claiming she needed to meet a colleague for brunch. She kissed him goodbye, the scent of that bold perfume trailing after her. But as the door clicked shut, something shifted inside him. He couldn't explain it, feeling an overwhelming certainty that whatever illusion they had maintained was about to crumble. David opened the laptop. He hadn't intended to invade her privacy. He hated the thought of being the kind of husband who snooped through emails and messages, but the doubt had festered for too long, and when it came to the truth, there was no turning back. The screen glowed as he navigated to Sarah's email. His heart pounded. Every part of him screamed to stop, to close the laptop and pretend. But pretending had never been an option. It didn't take long. A name appeared more often than it should have. Michael Weldon, her boss. The messages were frequent, disguised under the pretense of work discussions, but the tone told a different story. Compliments, inside jokes, words that belonged to lovers, not colleagues. And then the undeniable, a single message. "I can't stop thinking about last night. The way you touched me, the way you whispered my name." David's chest tightened, his vision blurred. It was there in black and white, the confirmation of everything he'd feared. Michael wasn't just her boss. He was her lover, the man who had unraveled the vows David and Sarah had once promised each other. He slammed the laptop shut, his hands trembling. The walls of their beautiful home seemed to close in around him. The laughter of his children echoed, a cruel reminder of the life he'd fought so hard to protect. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that Sarah had carried on, day after day, pretending, smiling, laughing, making breakfast, tucking their children into bed, all while sharing herself with another man. David wanted to scream, to demand answers, to tear apart the facade she had so carefully crafted, but he didn't. Not yet, because David knew something Sarah didn't. He knew the power of patience, of gathering every piece of the truth before striking. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about justice, about ensuring that the pain she had inflicted wouldn't go unanswered. The illusion was shattered. But now, David was no longer the helpless husband. He was the storm she never saw coming. David sat in the dimly lit room, the soft hum of the computer the only sound breaking the silence. The weight of what he had uncovered just days before still pressed against his chest. Michael Weldon. The name now echoed through his mind like a curse. Sarah's boss, her lover, the man who had taken what David once thought was his. Her heart, her body, her loyalty. But knowing wasn't enough. He needed proof. Cold, undeniable evidence that would bring every lie to the surface. Confronting Sarah without it would only result in more denial, more carefully woven stories. She was far too practiced in deceit now. David could see it in her eyes. Every glance was guarded, every word calculated. He had seen the messages, the stolen whispers disguised as work emails, but even those didn't tell the whole story. He wanted to know the depths of her betrayal, how long it had gone on, how far it had reached, and so, he decided to step into the shadows. Sarah's love for cooking had always been one of her greatest passions. She'd spend hours experimenting in the kitchen, scouring online forums for new recipes and tips. David had often watched her, flour dusting her hands, laughter spilling as she excitedly shared her latest culinary discovery. It was one of the things he had adored most about her. Now, that innocent hobby had become his gateway to the truth. He remembered the website she frequented, a food enthusiast community where home chefs exchanged recipes and stories. It was there she had found solace, or so he once believed. But now he wondered what else she had been searching for. With deliberate patience, David created a profile, a simple username, Emily Bakes, and a stock photo of a smiling woman with golden hair. She looked warm, unassuming, the kind of person other women would confide in. He hated the necessity of it, the deceit, but the stakes were far too high to hesitate. It didn't take long to find her. Savory Sarah, a username that now felt bitter on his tongue. Her posts were as cheerful as ever, detailing her latest attempts at gourmet meals and sharing anecdotes about family life. The facade she maintained was flawless, but David wasn't there for the recipes. He scanned the comments, the usernames. One in particular stood out, Golden Chef. They were far too familiar, their conversations laced with inside jokes and private references. David's jaw clenched. It was Michael, no question. The man had followed her even here, weaving himself into every part of her world. Taking a steady breath, David made his move. He commented on one of Sarah's posts, a harmless question about the perfect crust for a lemon tart. She responded, cheerful and polite. The conversation flowed easily. She had no idea who he truly was. Day by day he built their rapport. He became Emily, the supportive, curious friend, and Sarah welcomed her without hesitation. But David wasn't satisfied with the surface. He needed to go deeper. Emily shared stories, fabricated memories of a distant husband, struggles with feeling unseen, the ache of loneliness. He mirrored Sarah's experiences, carefully echoing the very doubts and fears she had whispered to Michael. And just as he'd hoped, she opened up. It's like, I don't even recognize him sometimes, she typed one night, the words appearing on the screen like a blade to David's chest. We used to be so in sync. Now it feels like we're just existing. David's hands trembled. He wanted to scream, to tell her how blind she was. But instead he responded as Emily would, understanding, empathetic. He pushed gently, asking questions that lured Sarah deeper into her own guilt. How do you cope with that? Sarah asked, her vulnerability pouring through the screen. David hesitated. The urge to lash out was suffocating. But no, he needed her to keep talking. I confide in someone, Emily replied, someone who understands. And there it was, the perfect opening. Sarah didn't hesitate. She spoke of Michael. She described him as her anchor, the one who reminded her what passion felt like. Every word ignited the fire within David, but he forced himself to remain calm. He needed more. Over the following weeks, Sarah revealed the truth in fragments. Their first stolen kiss in the office, the late-night hotel rendezvous, the way Michael made her feel alive in ways David no longer did. She claimed it wasn't love, just desire, a dangerous thrill that neither of them could resist. But it was the pregnancy that shattered him. "I missed my period," Sarah confessed in one of her messages to Emily. "I'm terrified. I don't know if it's his or David's." David's breath caught. The walls seemed to close in around him. He had undergone a vasectomy after Ethan was born. There was no question. If she was pregnant, it wasn't his. For days he didn't respond. He couldn't. He found himself wandering through the house like a ghost. The laughter of his children rang through the halls, a painful reminder of the family he once thought was unbreakable. Sarah remained oblivious, carrying on as if her double life had not yet caught up to her. But David knew, and now he had everything he needed. The digital deception had served its purpose. Every conversation, every confession was stored away, undeniable proof of her betrayal. He had been patient, but patience had its limits. Late one evening, as Sarah sat across from him on the couch, scrolling through her phone, David spoke. "How was your day?" he asked, his voice carefully even. She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Busy. You know how work is." David nodded. He knew exactly how work was. He knew about the hotel, the whispers, the stolen moments that Sarah had clung to, and soon so would she. David felt like a stranger in his own home. Every creak of the floorboards, every ticking second on the wall clock reminded him of the weight he carried. The walls no longer echoed the laughter they once did. The warmth had faded, replaced by a chilling emptiness. Sarah moved through the house like nothing had changed. She kissed the children goodnight, scrolled through her phone, and gave David absent smiles as though the secret she harbored wasn't poisoning the very air around them. But David knew better. The messages, the confessions, the whispers of a child that could never be his. Every moment she stood before him was laced with deceit. And now, he couldn't look at her without wondering which version of Sarah he was seeing. The devoted wife? The doting mother? Or the woman who tangled herself in the sheets of another man? But David was no longer the man drowning in uncertainty. The digital deception had unraveled the truth, and now all that remained was the evidence to seal it. Confronting her would be futile without proof. She was too clever, too practiced. Every lie she told had been carefully woven into their reality. He needed to dismantle that web, every strand, every thread. The first step was the phone. David waited until Sarah was in the shower, the sound of water cascading masking his movements. Her phone lay on the nightstand unlocked, a careless mistake. He picked it up, the familiar weight of it both foreign and intrusive. Part of him hated what he was doing, but the other part? The part that ached for the truth? It knew this was the only way. He scrolled quickly, the usual stream of mundane conversations with friends, family, colleagues. But it was the hidden messages that confirmed what he already knew. The encrypted app, the one she had installed under the guise of privacy, held everything. Every stolen kiss, every whispered promise, every sickening confession. Michael's words leapt from the screen. "I miss you already. Last night wasn't enough. Next week in Seattle. Just us." David clenched his jaw, forcing himself to read on. He needed the dates, the locations, proof that could not be denied. But what gutted him most wasn't the exchange of desire. It was the way Sarah spoke of him. "David's been distant lately. I don't even think he notices anymore. He thinks I'm tired from work. Poor guy." Every word twisted the knife deeper. The woman he had built a life with had reduced him to a footnote, an afterthought, the man she kissed before slipping into another's arms. But David wasn't done. The phone had given him the foundation. Now he needed more. He spent the next few days watching, listening, observing the woman who had once held his heart. Every lingering glance at her phone, every hurried text, every excuse she gave. She thought she was careful, but David saw the cracks. When she mentioned another conference in Atlanta, his stomach churned. He nodded, playing his role with precision. He wished her a safe trip, kissed her goodbye, and watched as she drove away. But as her taillights disappeared down the street, David's resolve only hardened. He had anticipated this. He knew her patterns. Every trip with Michael was a mirror image of the last, and this time he was ready. Hours later, David found himself parked outside a small private investigator's office. The sign was faded, the building unassuming. He hesitated only briefly before stepping inside. The man behind the desk was older, his eyes sharp with experience. David barely had to explain. The investigator had seen it all. The lies, the affairs, the betrayals. And now he would see Sarah's. "Follow her," David said, his voice steady. Document everything. It was a decision he never thought he'd make, but the man Sarah had reduced him to, the hollowed-out version of himself, demanded justice, not just for the betrayal, but for the years he had given her without question. Days passed, and David went through the motions. He picked up the children from school, cooked their meals, tucked them into bed. All the while, the shadows of doubt clung to him. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart seized. When the investigator's first report came through, he braced himself. The photographs were damning. Sarah and Michael walking side by side, hands brushing. A shared hotel room. The embrace that spoke of familiarity, intimacy. David traced his fingers over the images, bile rising in his throat. There was no denying it, no twisting the narrative. But it wasn't enough. David wanted the words, the admissions, the raw truth, so he continued the act. Emily, his fabricated persona, reached out once more. He lured Sarah deeper, her guilt bleeding through every message. She spoke of the pregnancy, the fear that Michael would abandon her. She never once considered David, only herself. And still David gathered. Every confession, every tear-streaked apology to Emily. The final piece came in the form of a call, a frantic voicemail Sarah had left for Michael. "We need to talk. David's been different. I think he knows." That was all he needed. But as David stared at the mountain of evidence before him, the weight of it all crashed down. He had spent weeks uncovering the truth, driven by anger and the need for closure. But now, standing on the edge of the inevitable confrontation, he felt hollow. What was left of their marriage had been reduced to ash. Even if Sarah fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness, there would be no salvation. The woman he had once adored no longer existed. She had been consumed by her own choices. And David? He was no longer the man who had waited patiently, hoping for the truth to reveal itself. He was the man who held it in his hands. David stood in the living room, his hands trembling as the shadows of the evening crept through the windows. The house was eerily silent, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the stillness. It was the kind of quiet that should have brought comfort. Yet all David felt was the unbearable weight of the truth. The confrontation had been inevitable, lingering like a storm on the horizon. And now it was here. Sarah walked through the front door, the keys jangling as she set them on the entryway table. She smiled, that same carefully practiced expression she'd worn for months, but David saw through it. He saw the guilt that flickered behind her eyes, the tension in the way she held her breath. She hadn't realized yet, hadn't noticed the shift in the air, but she would. "Hey," she said softly, stepping toward him. "Everything okay?" David's jaw clenched. The words he had rehearsed all day tangled in his throat. Every ounce of restraint he had clung to over the past weeks threatened to break. He wanted to scream, to ask her how she could stand there, looking at him like nothing had happened, but he didn't. Instead, he forced himself to stay composed. "Sit down," he said, his voice low, almost mechanical. Sarah blinked, confusion flashing across her face. She hesitated, as if searching for some clue as to what had shifted. David's heart pounded as he watched her carefully. This was the moment, the unraveling. "David, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he reached for the envelope on the table. Inside were the photos, the damning evidence, her laughter with Michael, the lingering touches, the stolen moments in hotels that were no longer secret. He tossed it onto the table, the contents spilling out in front of her. For a moment Sarah didn't move. Her eyes flicked over the images, her face draining of color. The carefully crafted facade she had built around herself cracked. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she clutched one of the photos, the one of her hand resting on Michael's chest. "Where did you?" her voice faltered. "I know everything," David said coldly. "The messages, the meetings, the lies, every single one." Sarah's chest rose and fell, panic flooding her eyes. "David, it's not." "Don't," he interrupted. "Don't insult me by trying to twist this. I gave you every chance to tell me the truth. I waited, I begged, and all the while you sat across from me every night and pretended." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was going to end it. I swear. I didn't know how." He laughed bitterly, the sound foreign even to himself. "You didn't know how? You knew how to sneak around, you knew how to lie, but ending it, that was too difficult." Sarah reached for him, but David stepped back. The space between them was no longer physical, it was immeasurable. Every memory, every shared moment now tainted. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. I was lost, David. I felt invisible. And Michael, he made me feel alive. David's jaw tightened. Alive? Was it worth it? Throwing away our family, our marriage? Was it worth destroying everything? Her sobs filled the air. But David didn't move to comfort her. Not this time. He thought of Lily and Ethan, the innocent laughter that echoed through the halls. Did she think of them? Did she think of what her choices would do to their children? You weren't invisible, Sarah. I saw you, every single day. I loved you, but that wasn't enough for you, was it? She shook her head, her hands trembling. I hate myself for what I've done. I'll do anything to fix this. Please, David. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. He had wanted to hear remorse, to see the burden of her betrayal crush her. Yet now that it was happening, it brought him no relief, only emptiness. I already filed for divorce, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. You'll be served tomorrow. The words shattered what little composure Sarah had left. She collapsed onto the couch, sobs racking her body. David watched, but he felt nothing. Not hatred, not anger, just a hollow ache that no apology could mend. I'm going for full custody, he continued. The evidence I have will ensure it. The affair, the lies, and the pregnancy. Sarah's head snapped up, her face twisted with panic. No. David, please. I'll tell the court everything. I'll say I was unfit, but don't take them from me. A flash of pain coursed through him. The thought of his children being separated from their mother should have torn him apart. But how could he trust her? How could he believe that she would prioritize them when she had already abandoned every vow she had made? I'm not the one who broke this family, Sarah. You did, she sobbed, her hands clutching at the fabric of her jeans. But David didn't stay. He turned, walking toward the door without another word. The weight of his steps echoed through the empty hallway. He had no destination, only the unbearable need to escape the ruins of what was once his life. The night air was cold as he stepped outside. Stars blinked in the sky, oblivious to the turmoil below. David's breath came in ragged gasps, the reality of the confrontation crashing down on him. He wanted to scream, to cry, to tear apart the world that had crumbled around him, but instead he stood still. The house behind him remained dark. Sarah's sobs muffled through the walls. The woman he had loved, the life they had built, it was all gone. But David knew one thing with certainty. The unraveling was complete, and from the wreckage he would rebuild. For his children, for himself. Sarah had made her choices. Now it was David's turn. The divorce papers had been signed. The echoes of that final confrontation still lingered in David's mind. Though the house now stood eerily quiet, there was no more tense laughter forced between him and Sarah. No more hushed whispers behind closed doors. The air was still, as if the house itself was holding its breath, uncertain of what came next. David had moved into a modest apartment on the other side of San Francisco, far from the memories that haunted their old home. He didn't take much, just a few pieces of furniture, his favorite leather armchair, and the children's drawings that once decorated the refrigerator. Everything else he left behind. The walls in his new space were bare, but for the first time in months, the emptiness was a relief. There were no shadows here. Lily and Ethan had taken the changes as well as could be expected. At just 5 and 7, they didn't fully understand the weight of their parents' separation. They knew Daddy lived in a new place and that Mommy wouldn't be joining them on weekend visits. David did his best to shield them from the bitterness that had consumed him. He answered their innocent questions with a gentle smile, telling them that sometimes Mommies and Daddies lived in different houses, but still loved their children just the same. But behind closed doors, the reality wasn't so simple. The custody battle had been swift, with David's evidence leaving little room for Sarah to argue. She had cried in the courtroom, her voice trembling as she promised she would be a better mother. The judge had granted David primary custody, allowing Sarah only supervised visitation rights for the time being. Even with her remorse on display, David couldn't forget the choices she had made. He had seen the proof. The nights she spent with Michael instead of coming home. The whispered declarations of love that were never meant for him. Yet, even with victory in court, there was no satisfaction. Only exhaustion. The kind that settled deep into his bones and refused to let go. Therapy had become a necessity. First, David had resisted. The idea of sitting across from a stranger and unraveling the mess of his life felt unbearable. But when the anger had nowhere else to go, when the sleepless nights brought only the echo of Sarah's betrayal, he relented. The therapist's office was small, lined with bookshelves and a single potted plant by the window. Ellis had a calming presence, her voice low and steady as she listened. Have you allowed yourself to grieve? she asked during one session. David scoffed at the question. Grieve? How could he grieve someone who had willingly destroyed the life they built? But in the stillness that followed, he realized the truth. He wasn't grieving Sarah. He was grieving the version of her that had once existed. The woman who had kissed him in the rain on their wedding day, who had held his hand tightly during Ethan's first steps. That woman was gone, and David had to let her go. Days turned into weeks. The apartment began to feel more like a home. David made pancakes on Sunday mornings just like he used to. Lily and Ethan would giggle as they poured too much syrup, their sticky fingers reaching for him in laughter. He took them to the park, pushed them on the swings until their cheeks were flushed with joy. But the nights were harder. The silence was unbearable, and even the most exhausted days left him staring at the ceiling, lost in thoughts he couldn't quiet. He thought of Sarah, of whether she lay awake too, burdened by regret. She had called once, her voice trembling through the receiver. "I'm sorry, David," she whispered, "for everything." But what did apologies matter when the damage was already done? He hadn't responded. The weight of her words lingered, but he refused to let them pull him back. He had to move forward, not just for himself but for Lily and Ethan. Work became his escape. The numbers, the logic, the predictability of it all offered a strange comfort. His colleagues noticed the change. He wasn't the man who once shared stories of family vacations and weekend adventures. He was quieter now, more reserved. But with time, the small moments of light began to return. Then one afternoon David met Emily. It wasn't the Emily he had created, the fictional persona he'd used to expose Sarah's lies. This Emily was real. She was the owner of a small coffee shop tucked away on a side street, her laughter spilling through the air like sunlight. He had stopped by for a simple cup of coffee, but the warmth in her eyes caught him off guard. They talked, the conversation flowing effortlessly. She spoke of her love for travel, the way she found beauty in the mundane. There were no pretenses, no shadows. David didn't tell her his full story that day. He wasn't ready, but for the first time he allowed himself to feel something other than bitterness. He laughed, and it wasn't forced. Weeks passed, and Emily became a presence in his life. She asked about Lily and Ethan, listened to his stories with genuine interest. There was no rush, no expectation, just two people finding solace in each other's company. David still felt the weight of his past, but it was no longer unbearable. Sarah's visits with the children became more consistent. She tried. David could see it in the way she clung to their laughter, desperate to mend what she had broken. He didn't stop her. He wanted the children to have their mother, even if she would never be the woman he once believed she was. Forgiveness didn't come easily. It wasn't a single moment of release, but a gradual letting go. David forgave not because Sarah deserved it, but because he did. Carrying the bitterness only gave her power over him, and he refused to live like that. On a crisp autumn evening, David stood on the balcony of his apartment. Lily and Ethan were asleep, their soft breaths filling the small space with comfort. Emily had left hours ago, but the lingering warmth of her presence remained. He gazed out at the San Francisco skyline, the city lights flickering like distant stars. He thought of the man he had been, the one who had loved blindly, who had given without question. That man was gone, but in his place stood someone stronger, someone who had weathered the storm and emerged, not unscathed but unbroken. David had reclaimed his life, not in spite of the betrayal but because of it. He had faced the darkness and found the light waiting on the other side. And as he whispered goodnight to his children, he knew that this chapter, the chapter of sorrow and rage, had ended. The future was his, and for the first time in a long time he welcomed it. David's story was never about a simple betrayal. It was about the slow unraveling of a life that once seemed unbreakable, the devastating realization that the person he trusted most had become a stranger. But more than that, it was a story of resilience. Through the storm of infidelity, deceit, and heartbreak, David found not just the end of a chapter but the beginning of a new one. When Sarah's affair came to light, it wasn't just the betrayal of a spouse that shattered him. It was the betrayal of every shared dream, every whispered promise. The Victorian house in San Francisco that had once symbolized warmth now echoed with emptiness. The marriage he had built with devotion crumbled under the weight of secrets, and the family he held dear became collateral damage in a betrayal neither Lily nor Ethan could ever fully understand. But even as the world he knew disintegrated, David did what many in his position struggled to do. He faced the truth. He gathered the fragments of his broken heart, no longer allowing the illusion of a happy marriage to deceive him. It would have been easy to fall into despair, to drown in anger and resentment. Yet David chose a different path. The confrontation with Sarah was a necessary storm, a collision of guilt, regret, and anger. Her tears were genuine, but they could not undo the choices she had made. For David, the confrontation wasn't just about exposing the affair. It was about reclaiming his voice. After months of silence, he stood face to face with the truth, no longer a passive observer in his own life. It was painful, it was gut-wrenching, but it was also liberating. Filing for divorce was not an act of vengeance. It was an act of self-preservation. David knew that holding on to a broken marriage would only deepen the wounds. The custody battle that followed was yet another trial, but one he endured for the sake of his children. His priority remained clear, ensuring that Lily and Ethan were shielded from the worst of the fallout. Though the court ruled in his favor, granting him primary custody, David understood that the scars would remain. The weight of explaining to his children why their parents no longer lived together would never be easy. Therapy became a lifeline. At first, David resisted the notion of unpacking his pain in front of a stranger. But as he sat in that small room, the walls lined with books and framed diplomas, he began to understand the power of confronting his emotions. The therapist didn't offer easy answers. Instead, she held up a mirror to his grief, his anger, and the guilt that lingered even when he wasn't to blame. Slowly, David learned to navigate the storm within him. Forgiveness was the most difficult step, not because Sarah deserved it but because David deserved peace. Forgiving her didn't mean forgetting or excusing her betrayal. It meant releasing the chains that bound him to the past. Carrying the bitterness only prolonged his suffering. By choosing to forgive, David reclaimed his power. But healing wasn't a solitary act. It was in the laughter of his children, the sound of their feet running across the hardwood floor of his modest apartment. It was in the simple joy of making breakfast on lazy Sunday mornings, of tucking them into bed with stories of imaginary worlds. David poured his love into them, ensuring they felt the unwavering presence of a father who would never fail them. And then came Emily. Meeting her wasn't something David had anticipated. After the devastation of his marriage, he had sworn off the possibility of love. But Emily was different. She wasn't a shadow of the past, she was light. Their conversations weren't laced with pretense or fear. She didn't ask him to forget his pain. She simply stood beside him as he rebuilt his life. Through her patience and warmth, David learned that love could exist without conditions. His relationship with Sarah also transformed. The bitter words and accusations faded with time. Co-parenting wasn't easy, but David remained steadfast in his commitment to their children. Sarah, burdened with the consequences of her choices, worked to rebuild her own life. And though the remnants of their marriage would never fully disappear, David no longer held on to the anger that once consumed him. But what lessons can we take from David's story? First and foremost, it's a reminder of the importance of self-worth. David's initial instinct was to hold on to his marriage, even when the signs of betrayal became undeniable. He wanted to believe in the version of Sarah he once knew. But loving someone does not mean sacrificing your own dignity. Recognizing when a relationship is no longer serving your growth and well-being is an act of strength, not weakness. Secondly, David's journey shows us the power of facing uncomfortable truths. Many people choose denial when confronted with betrayal, fearing the pain that comes with acknowledgement. But avoidance only prolongs the suffering. David's decision to confront the truth, no matter how painful, was the first step toward reclaiming his autonomy. Forgiveness is another critical lesson. While it may feel impossible in the immediate aftermath of betrayal, forgiveness is not about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of resentment. David chose to forgive Sarah not because she deserved it, but because he refused to allow her actions to define his future. Forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. It means choosing peace. And perhaps most importantly, David's story underscores the resilience of the human spirit. Life will inevitably break us at times. The people we trust may disappoint us. The dreams we nurture may crumble. But from those shattered pieces we have the power to build something new. David didn't simply survive his heartbreak. He grew from it. He found new love, redefined his family, and emerged stronger than before. For anyone watching this story and finding echoes of their own pain, know that healing is not linear. Some days will feel unbearable. The shadows of betrayal will linger longer than you'd like. But every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory. Lean on those who support you. Seek help when the weight becomes too heavy. And most importantly, know that your worth is not defined by the actions of others. If you've reached this point, Thank you for taking this emotional journey with us. Stories like David's are a reminder of our shared humanity, our ability to endure, to heal, and to grow. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something within you, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue creating stories that inspire, heal, and provoke thought. By subscribing, you ensure that we can bring more content like this to you. Stories that shed light on the complexities of life and the resilience of the human heart. And remember, no matter how broken the pieces may feel, you have the strength to reclaim your own life, one step at a time. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.